Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the topic of the Gluware OS Manager app. OS Manager is used to automate network operating system and firmware upgrades, downgrades, patches, whatever is needed. If you're taking the Gluware test drive, you'll be able to follow along with the steps I'm showing in this session. And in this session, we're going to cover kind of the pre-requirements like setting up your file server. We're going to look at the file server itself and how you set up files and how you synchronize the file server with remote file servers. We're going to jump into OS Manager and look at how it's a plan-based execution, how you can leverage catalogs, how you can create your plans and execute your plans, and look at the logs and execute operating system upgrades, downgrades at scale. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to sign into the Gluware platform here. So Gluware signs me back into the last place I was, which was on the dashboard view. So let's take a look at the first thing you need to set up for using OS Manager beyond the administrative part of having the license for it is jump into System Settings. And by the way, since I mentioned that, just let's go ahead and look at licensing, and you can validate that you have the OS Manager license. In this test system, I have a perpetual license installed. Next is you want to go under Organizations and look at OS Management. Now, OS management can be handled on a per org basis, like I'm in this test drive for pod 1 org, or you also can set it up where the children orgs of a primary organization is providing that setup. And that's actually what I have here. I am exposing the main file server here. However, the primary file server was actually described or defined on my system org. And that could be a useful way if you want to cascade settings from one primary org down to a bunch of children orgs. It can help in just terms of setup where you don't have to necessarily go and set up each individual org with the settings. So let's just take a quick look at what you're doing. You are enabling, at a minimum for OS Manager, you need to use one file server provided by Gluware. That is your so-called master or primary file server that you will load the operating system and firmware images onto. Optionally, you can install additional file servers that will synchronize with the master file server. And the main goal of that is, let's say your master is sitting at your primary office location or data center. Then you have other regional locations or other data centers. You most likely would want to put a file server local to where you have a lot of devices. Otherwise, when you execute upgrades, the transfer of the image is going to go between the file server wherever it exists and the devices. So by putting a file server out closer to your devices is going to save time in the process and save bandwidth on your network. So I think that's pretty clear. I think most folks in the industry understand what file servers are and the benefit of having them closer to the end nodes. So you're setting up your file server. That is set up. And then you're setting up your ports. We have different protocols you can use for the transfer, SCP, FTP, and TFTP, as well as you can enable anonymous FTP. These ports are configurable, and by the way, the ports are only opened up in our system when you're actively performing a synchronization or a transfer. So otherwise, those ports are closed for security purposes. A catalog is optional. But in larger organizations, generally a catalog is just a best practice. A catalog essentially means someone in your organization in engineering or architecture has done their homework, has selected an image, working with the vendor, has looked at the known bugs or issues, has tested it, and has kind of put it into an approved catalog. What you don't necessarily want to do is just go and grab the latest image from a vendor and push it out into production. You want to do that homework and that pre-validation to kind of have an approved image and standardized images where you know the feature set, any issues that might be existing in that release. And then this one down here, plan execution. Gluware by default will operate in parallel, meaning as many provisioning engines as available, as many job engines available will execute in parallel. So that could be 10 or 50 or 100 or more, all in parallel, executing upgrades down to the network devices. When you're first starting out and you're more conservative, and let's say maybe you're expecting more failures because you're in testing, you can turn on this linear job execution mode, which will go one by one. So it will dramatically slow down your effective ability to execute all those jobs. However, if you want to kind of fail faster, you can tick this box here and also abort on, let's say, failures greater than, let's say, 20% or some threshold. So the whole plan goal there is to just basically, when you're testing it, be able to get to a failed state faster if you're going to have some issues with something when you're executing your upgrades. So that's all you have to do in your organization. Next, from the app switcher here, let's go ahead and jump into the file server. And this is what I was talking about. From this org here, my file server, from this organization here, my file server, it appears to be empty. So what I'm going to show you is that the file server was actually set up under another organization, a parent organization of this child. So navigating to that org, we can look at the File Explorer here and see what's happening here. So this is pretty straightforward, but basically what you're doing is creating files and then putting images into those files. And so you can add folders, you can edit, you can add images, and you can copy and you can delete. But basically this is where you may have an approved image catalog file for Catalyst 9K images, and this potentially could be the approved images. Or you may have a non-catalog view and you'll have all images that are in the system. So we're going to take a look at it, but basically in our use case here, we have a switch that is currently running 16.6.5, and we're going to be upgrading it to 16.6.7. So that image, my image that I want to use, is in the system for that Cat 3K. So that's pretty much all you have to do. If you have additional file servers configured on your system, they will synchronize with the master, and they use the rsync protocol, a very reliable transfer protocol. It can even work over very slow links. We've had great experience with the file server and the master file server synchronizing with remotes, even over very slow, very remote links. The synchronization eventually will complete, since rsync is a very, very reliable protocol. So that being said, let's navigate back to the org we're working in, test drive for pod 1. And now we're going to navigate into the OS Manager application. So let's jump into OS Manager. The look and feel of OS Manager is a bit similar to Drift and Audit. So if you've taken that tutorial or used that application, it's going to be fairly familiar from the standpoint of in the lower part of the screen, you either are looking at your Device Explorer, or you can navigate over to your catalog view or your plan view. So similarly in Drift and Audit, you have like your Audit Policy Explorer. In OS Manager, everything is based on plans. So let's go in and walk through the steps to create a new plan. So we tick this box here, create a new plan. We're going to do OS upgrade. In this first step, you can decide, and it is vendor dependent, but in this case of a Cisco switch, you can determine if you're going to transfer the image only as a first step, or you're going to deploy the image, which is you could potentially transfer and reboot to fully upgrade the device. So you can do it in 2 steps, or you can do it in 1 step. We're going to do it in 2 steps in this example here, so I'm going to hit create. So now I have a draft plan. And what you're going to do with your plan is so I already have a name, then I can have a description, and then this is where I was saying you have those 2 options. One is a transfer only. Next is if I have not transferred, a deploy new image will transfer and deploy. If I've already transferred and I execute deploy and it determines the image is already on the device and ready to go, it will just execute the upgrade and the reboot without performing the transfer. So we're going to do a transfer image only. Next is, Gluware is built for scale and built to accommodate, lots of devices. So we have filtering mechanisms to either by default filter by SKU, or to turn that off, and you can filter by kind of any other criteria. And instead of having to, let's say, hand select devices, let's say you are you're going to upgrade all your Cat3Ks at one particular campus location, you can have Gluware select or match all those devices automatically using a filter. So in this case, we're going to do add a device, and we're going to just manually select it. But you certainly, if you selected none, and we're defaulting by SKU here, if you said none, then you can build the filter yourself to select those devices. So hopefully that's clear. But basically, it's just a mechanism to more efficiently or effectively select the devices. So I've selected, in this case, it's only one device, but again, normally, we're built for scale. You'd be doing a bunch of devices in parallel once you've gotten through your testing processes. But let's just consider this as the test and validation in a lab before we go to production with automating the upgrade of the 3650 stack switches. So here I hit save, and then I navigate back to my plan. And so now I have a group by SKU, but if I break this out, there's only one switch that is in that group, and that's fine. Because again, we're working with a small lab here, and this is just for test and demonstration purposes. So now that I have my plan and I have a device that is added into the plan, it says select edit to choose files. So I'm going to go ahead and select edit here. And as I was saying before, I think best practice is to enable and use catalogs, but I don't have this set up currently in this environment, so I'm going to just point to the server and browse the server for the images available. So as I referenced before, we're looking at that main server that is defined in the other organization that we're picking up as a child org. So here I can see the images available. I'm running 16.6.5 and I want to upgrade to 16.6.7. So I select this image by clicking on it. I move it over here, and then the transfer protocol is very important. You may have a company policy to use SCP. You may have a policy where you don't allow TFTP. But for the purpose of tests, SCP is much more secure but much slower. TFTP is going to be the fastest option for transferring. So I do recommend during at least test and validation processes, definitely use what you're going to use in production. But if you're just executing and learning Gluware and whatnot, I would recommend TFTP to save a lot of time when executing. So you select your image, your transfer protocol, you hit save, and you hit back to your plan. So if you look at the progress indicator here, our plan is drafted, it's waiting on validation, and then you run. So the next step in terms of using OS Manager here is to validate your plan. So basically just come down here and click validate. Validate's going to move you over to a window and show you a very high level summary log. It's very important to understand that Gluware has a lot of, let's call it the business logic or the process logic already built in. Validation is going to occur to check the health of the device. It's going to check the communication with the file server. It's going to ensure that image is there and also is compatible with the device. It's going to look and understand how, well, as you get into actually running it, it's going to understand if the vendor is, prefers you to use a bundle mode or something else. It's going to look at the boot statements on the device. It's even going to look at if the config running on the device has been saved or not. If the running config has not been saved, you'll error out and get an error. So what I can see in this high-level summary view is there is a warning. There's no failures or validation errors. There is a warning, but it's related to licensing, which is fine. I can kind of disregard that. So my plan has been validated, and I can see the status down here. So I hit back. Now I'm drafted, I'm validated, I have the ability to run. So we can either schedule the run, which again in production environments, you probably want to execute these things at a very known time, especially if you're transferring large images or a lot of images to a lot of devices. You're going to want to know, you might want to schedule it for an off-hour transfer, but I'm going to go ahead and hit run now and hit move on to confirm the run. So we're going to queue for the job and then run. And what I do recommend is while you're running, you can bring up the log view and you can either hover over it to see a summary level, or you can double click into it. And similarly, as you've seen in other demos, you get the common user, device level interaction. This is the device level log. And you're going to see everything Gluware is doing on that device. So you can go, as I was talking about a lot of the pre-checks, you can actually comb through the log and see all the validation it's doing. It's looking at the file system. It's ensuring you have the space. It will clean up. It will clean up the required space to ensure that it has room to transfer it. So numerous checks are being done here, and you can look at that. And I do highly suggest, as you're learning and working with Gluware, to go ahead and do that. So it's executing all the cleanup options. And then once it actually gets into the transfer mode itself, where the transfer is occurring, I will kind of speed up the video here to not make you sit through whatever it is, a 6 or 7 minute, or I'm not sure the exact time of the transfer itself. But as you're looking at this, I do want to point out one thing that's pretty interesting. When you're looking at this, you might think, well, how is Gluware getting all this feedback from the device? Because generally when you log in a primary session and you're executing an upgrade, you're not getting any feedback from that device, because that primary session you're using is tied up executing the upgrade itself or doing the transfer. Gluware spawns a secondary SSH session and is kind of terminal monitoring, or it's monitoring all of the logging that's occurring or the messages available from the device. So we actually do spawn a second session to the device so we can monitor it during the transfer. And also, since Gluware is the other end of the side, it's where we own the file server, or where the file server is within our system, we have exact visibility of the transfer percentages and exactly where we stand. So we're going to just give it a few minutes here to get to the point where it is fully transferring. And so the transfer is in progress here. You're going to begin to see updates come to the screen with the status of the transfer. And you'll see that incrementing. So here we go. That's what, if you were watching it from a single view, you would only be seeing those kind of bang, the exclamation points, iterating. Since we have 2 sessions going, we can understand exactly what's happening on the switch. And now that the transfer is in progress, I will jump back to the detailed view, and I will pick back up when I execute when I get to 100% complete. Okay, so we are back here. It did take several minutes. However, the transfer did run to success, and the action is completed with 100% success. And I can see down, one thing to note, because Gluware OS Manager is plan-based, the plan will always run to a completed state unless you cancel the plan. Complete does not mean success. You could have a complete plan that failed. So what you do want to validate is that it's complete, but also that it was deemed to be successful. And I can see this. So if I had multiple devices running, this is where I'd have my full device list. And my device log is available here, as I already brought up. And again, you can double click into that log to see details on a device. And you can comb through all the details and see what Gluware has done. So I'll jump back to the detailed view. Also, you can navigate to the activities view, and this is where you really have kind of a summary level of the plan or what was run. So this is summary level. Back to this view here, this is your per device view, and you can navigate into the device logs. So now that the plan is complete, all we've done at this point is had a successful transfer. The next step would be to execute the deployment of that operating system and complete it. Generally, it's definitely true in this series of Cisco devices, when you execute the deployment, it is disruptive because it will have to reboot the device to take effect. So if I had failures, I could create a plan from the failure and rerun it. It would just save you a little bit of time in creating a new plan to try to rerun it. I don't have any failures. I do have a successful completed plan. What I can do, again, just to speed time, is I can clone the plan that exists. Okay? So I clone the plan, but now, and again, it's just a time-saving step. So instead of OS upgrade transfer, it's OS upgrade deploy. And instead of the plan being to transfer, I'm going to deploy. So just a little bit of a time-saving step in understanding that OS Manager is plan-based. If my transfer plan completed, I can clone that plan. I can make that plan to be a deployment plan, and I'm all set here. One additional thing I'll point out is that if you've taken the config drift and audit tutorial, you know that Gluware has the ability to execute snapshots of configuration and compare those. So what we've integrated here is the ability to perform a pre and post, or pre or whichever option you select here, but generally pre and post op make the most sense, because you may want to see when I changed my operating system what was affected within the configuration, because generally there are things that are affected. Sometimes it's a boot statement, sometimes it is a default configuration is either hidden or exposed, or a syntax has changed. And so it's very important to understand when you're upgrading devices, especially if there are pretty big jumps forward or maybe even back, what or how the configuration has changed. So we do recommend enabling that snapshot, assuming you have the config drift and audit app licensed. So now that we're here, we have so let me save the plan. So my draft is created. Next step is to validate the plan. So again, I get a high-level summary of the validation. It's validating that it's going to run all the previous pre-checks. It's going to be looking at, this time it's going to look at and understand, does it need to transfer the image? Is the image already on the device? What is the health of the device? What is the boot statement? Has the running configuration been saved? Again, it's a whole checklist of things that are executed. And I can see again, no validation errors. The only thing brought up again is the warning about a license, which I can disregard. So I'm good there. So I hit back. Now I can run the plan. So I'm going to execute a run now and hit run. Again, I can also schedule it, which is, I would recommend it. If you're trying to schedule it inside a maintenance window or execute it off hours, this is a disruptive change once it reboots the device. So when I'm watching this or working with it, I often double click. Got to make sure you get on the logo here into the device log file, the detailed log, because it's very interesting, and I definitely recommend you looking back at these logs. And got a little float over. Look at these logs and understand the sophistication in all the actions that Gluware is doing. So when I look at this, I kind of wipe my brow and I'm relieved that, having flashbacks of my days in network ops and engineering when I had to execute a lot of operating system upgrades and I was doing all this stuff by hand, not fun. Also, when you look at the depth of what's happening, if you think about trying to script this or, execute it with scripts, it's super challenging, and chances are if I were scripting it, I would skip a lot of steps and therefore probably reduce the overall chances of success or bring up more risk in an upgrade. By putting and executing your upgrades in the process that Gluware executes, it makes it highly reliable and only will actually commit to a disruptive change or something that's going to impact the device if all the pre-checks have been validated and the device is in a good state. So again, it's just implementing all the best practices that the vendor has predetermined. And now, again, it's going through all the checks and balances. It's removing old images, making sure everything is set up. And I will bounce back to the detailed view and still doing it at a high level. It's doing the pre-installation cleanup phase. You can watch it run through the phases. It's sitting at 40%. So just for the sake of time and not kind of babysitting every phase, I will pause my recording and pick back up when the action is complete. Okay, so here in the OS upgrade process, I can see it has finalized, gone to 100% completion, and has resulted in a success. And I can double click into the log and see all the interaction with the device. So with that, this concludes the tutorial on the OS Manager. Hopefully you can understand the process of setting up your file servers and then building your plans to execute transfers or deploy, or transfer and deploy, and you can accelerate deploying operating system upgrades or downgrades or patches in your environment. Thanks again.